I'm Sherman Stanford, and this is Making Sense of the Chaos. And not surprisingly, what we're doing here is trying to make sense of the chaos. We have discussed God, who He is, some of His attributes, man, both fallen and redeemed man, and of course unfallen man before the fall. And over the last several days, we've been talking about unredeemed man, also known as the seed of the serpent, the unregenerate. There are a lot of names for unregenerate man. Sinners. Actually, one of the peculiarities is that in the Bible, Christians are referred to as the elect or brothers, saints, but they're never called sinners. That's an interesting thing, and that's because the righteousness of Jesus has been imputed to them, and God never sees them henceforth from their point of conversion on as sinners. And so when we talk about Christians as being sinners, that's really not quite biblical. It doesn't mean that we don't sin, but it means that the category to which we belong is no longer the sinner category. It's now the saints category, which is not to say that we all pull for the New Orleans Saints. It's quite another question altogether. At any rate, we have discussed the fact that everybody needs a cosmology, an ontology, and an epistemology in order to make sense of the world around them. Those are kind of big terms, but behind them are pretty simple concepts. Cosmology is how did the world come into existence and how does it perpetuate itself. Second, ontology is how did being come into existence. You as a living creature, me as a living creature, how did we happen along? And epistemology is the explanation for how it is we come to know things reliably. And at this point, we're talking about we talked about the unbeliever's cosmology and his ontology. Now we're talking about his epistemology. There are a few principles that I want to lay out before we get into that. First, God created the cosmos for His glory, not for man's. Second, the jewel of creation is man. Third, and that means mankind, not men, masculine. I'm old school, I'm sorry. 3, although in no sense the author of evil, God ordained Adam's fall. How can that be? Well, frankly, I don't know. That's what the Bible teaches. And God knows all things. He's created all things. My mind is about the size of a pea. And so it doesn't surprise me that there are many things that I don't understand and cannot understand. And I'm fine with that. Now, I try to understand everything that I can, and that's what we're talking about here, is trying to understand all that is available to be understood. 4, in Adam, the entire creation fell, including all of mankind. But not just man, the entire creation. That's why we have weeds. That's why we struggle to earn a living. That's why women have pain in childbirth. And that's why women rebel against their husbands' authorities. Read Genesis 3:16. It's right there. It's part of the curse. 5, as a result of the fall, God pronounced the curse of enmity between the seed of the woman, all of those who will spend eternity with God, and the seed of the serpent, the remainder of humanity. This is known as the great antithesis, which means divided into 2 warring camps forever. If you don't understand that, you're not going to understand what's going on around you. I mean, this is a fundamental fact set in the beginning of the Bible. I mean, any author creates his setting early in the book. He establishes the themes within which he intends to operate early in the book, and God did the same thing. 6, all subsequent human experiences and outworking of this enmity, we just talked about. 7, the unregenerate are without excuse. They know God, but suppress the truth in culpable self-deceit. Okay. Now, just as an aside, you may ask yourself, why do we bother with this? Well, ideas have consequences. And our minds are remarkable creations. They are far more sophisticated and able to integrate and evaluate information than we're aware of. If you have a contradiction existing in your life, there's a very good likelihood that at least subconsciously your mind is aware of it, and it creates a disharmony within you. Now, aside from the fact that if you're not in harmony with God, which is the greatest disharmony that a human being can experience, to be at war with his own creator, but every contradiction within your life is going to create some measure of disharmony. And if you add all of those up, there's no doubt that you cannot be at peace with yourself or with your surroundings, with your fellow man, with God, if your life is just filled with disharmony. So what we're trying to do here is to straighten out all of those contradictions that may exist in our lives. And you start by getting as fundamental as you possibly can. You have to understand first principles first, or I was explaining to Bill this morning, this is like trying to understand a tree by starting from the bowl, the trunk, and working your way out. But so much of what we do as human beings is we try to understand a tree by counting the leaves. Now, any tree will have a great number of leaves, but after you've counted all the leaves, what do you know about the tree? Not very much. But you've managed to complicate the task immeasurably. On the other hand, if you figure out something about the trunk and the root system and the branches, then figuring out the leaves is not going to be nearly as complicated, and you don't have to know something about every leaf to know a good deal about any leaf. Anyway, that's what we're trying to do here. Now, we have talked about the unbeliever's cosmology, that is his theory, his explanation for how the world came into existence, his ontology, his theory about how being came into existence a little bit. We'll do more of that later. And now we're talking about his epistemology. We talked about the necessary preconditions for human knowledge, truth, meaning, purpose, those things. We began talking about those. And now we're on purpose. If it were true that the universe lacks purpose, which is another necessary precondition for human knowledge, and we know that we know things. Okay, I know that I'm talking to you right now. I know that. How can I come to know that if I deny God? If I deny that there's purpose in the universe? But if we deny purpose in the universe, knowledge becomes impossible. At best, knowledge then would be an almost infinite number of discrete, that is separate, sensory experiences lacking continuity or aim, which in no way reflects actual human knowledge. We don't know 10,000 unrelated things. We, whether we're trying to or not, our minds naturally try to make connections between different things that we know, even in different areas. We try to figure out, how does this all fit together? Why? Well, because we're made in the image of God, and He fit everything together. So our minds will be groping and probing, trying to copy, to the extent they're able, what God did in the universe. We cannot think without assuming purposiveness. Behind every thought or action is the question, why? Nothing we think or do is simply free-floating. All rational thought and action proceed from some point or points and is aimed at another point or points. Purpose is therefore an inescapable concept which cannot be accounted for on naturalistic assumptions, because it's the opposite of non-purposive disorder, randomness, chance. And remember, if you're a naturalist, if you say the cosmos is all that is, all that ever was, and all that ever will be, then everything just happens by chance. There's no superintending mind behind it. That very mind is the entire thing naturalists want to deny. They can't have it both ways. They can't deny the mind and then import into their system, smuggle into their system, the things that only that mind can provide, like meaning and purpose and truth and order. That's what they try to do, though. And our purpose here is to say, whoa, can't do that. Illegitimate. Okay, confine yourself to your own system. Now make sense of the world based on your system. Don't be smuggling in my system into your system without attribution. Okay? Admit you're doing it. Admit that your system is inadequate. And then we can talk. In the same way, once again, if it were true that the universe lacks meaning, human knowledge would be reduced to numberless, separate sensory experiences incapable of communication or understanding. To come to any conclusion about anything, regardless of its ordinariness, requires thinking in terms of the thing's meaning. You can't think about a thing without, on some level, trying to figure out what it means. What does this mean? What does this mean? Somebody calls you a dirty so-and-so, and you say, what do you mean by that? You can't get around it. You live and breathe in that world. And denying the world in which you live and breathe is just nonsense. Additionally, the assertion that the world is meaningless is a self-refuting statement. Let me fix this. For the assertion to be intelligible, it too must mean something. For me to tell you there is no meaning, I at least have to mean there is no meaning. Which means, of course, that I'm just simply nuts. There's a lot of nutty people in the world. We're all walking around praising the emperor's new clothes until some little boy comes along and says, I think he's naked. I think he is too. Because our experience of knowing is inextricably bound together with meaning, denying meaning is itself meaningless nonsense. I like writing that sentence. The idea of knowing there is no meaning in the world is sublime absurdity. It is impossible to imagine knowing anything, even knowing that there is no meaning, without knowing in some sense the meaning of what we purport to know. The need for meaning is thus an essential element of our integration into the world. For an example of the impossibility of living in a world without meaning, torturers use methods of destroying or compromising the awareness of meaning in their subjects to break down the mind's structure, allowing them to extract the information they seek. These tactics are effective because meaning is an inescapable precondition not only for human knowledge, but more than that, it is even a necessary condition for maintaining human sanity. While we can accept that phenomena exist whose meanings we do not know, we cannot survive in a world lacking meaning as a fundamental category. A world lacking any meaning on any level, a world anchored in randomness or non-purposive disorder. We cannot even contemplate such a reality in our imaginations. Any effort to try to sketch that out would require importing meaning and purpose into the effort. You just can't do it. To do so requires positing a world in which anything ideational on any level is impossible, even the idea of ideas per se. That sounds like nonsense, doesn't it? Yes, it does. And it's all around us. People saying things that just cannot be supported. Some might say, and I've had some people say this to me, that while meaning does not exist in any transcendent way, it can be self-created by each person. I make my own meaning in life. Well, now that has a certain superficial, spurious plausibility, but it's nonsense. If meaning as a category is denied, then it is less than honest to later smuggle in the category of meaning in discrete form for each person. That is, I have my meaning and you have your meaning. Moreover, doing so accomplishes nothing, for it fails to account for participation in common meaning by more than one person at the same time. Let me explain. If I'm going to talk to you or you're going to talk to me, if I say to you, I love you, for instance, and you have no idea what I mean by I, or love, or you, since those things are established by my meaning, and then you establish the meaning of those words by your meaning, then how can I tell you I love you and you get any meaning at all behind it unless we participate in a common shared meaning that exists beyond both of us? That is, you and I both agree that I means the individual, love means this emotion, and you means the other individual. Unless we both understand that and agree to it, then we can't understand one another when we talk. Now that's a simple communication. But what about complex communications? What about communications between more than just two people? What if we have thousands of people participating in meaning at the same time, in a communication of meaning at the same time, but they don't even begin to share the same meaning world? Each has his own meaning world, and there's no spillover at all. How do you escape your own little prison cell that you've created? You can't. And you can't make contact on any level with any other person because you can't even establish meaning from which to communicate. Does that make sense? It's perfectly nonsensical, and yet rational human beings, in their desperate pursuit of denial of God in their lives and his right to tell them what to do with their lives, particularly with their sexual organs, go around saying this. Sometimes I wonder if their ears are plugged up. Can they possibly hear the nonsense coming out of their mouths? I don't think they do. Despite the ideological denial of meaning by scientific naturalism, observable communications of meaning clearly occur broadly across vast cultural groupings, even across the broad spectrum of humanity itself, giving the lie to the notion that meaning can be self-created by individual humans. Not only that, but when scientific naturalists communicate conclusions, they mean to say something intelligible. Additionally, except for the notion of absolutes, we could know nothing without the absolute of infallibility existing somewhere. And you understand, naturalism denies absolutes. But if the absolute of infallibility does not exist anywhere, there could be no truth existing at all. Even to function in terms of probability in hoping to sidestep the necessity for the category of absolute infallible truth assumes infallibility somewhere. Why? Well, let me ask you, when you watch the weatherman on television and he says 80% chance of rain today, what is that 80% of? It's 80% of your garden? Or it's 80% of 100%? It's 80% of 100%. I mean, you can't make meaning of 80% if it's not 80% of something, right? Now, if there's no such thing as 100% of anything, which would be an absolute, how can we have 80% of a thing that doesn't exist? All right? I mean, I walk into the grocery store or the butcher shop and I tell him I want 80% of a cut of duh. Then he says, duh? And of course, that's exactly what he should say. Duh? Excuse me? I'm sorry for seeming to make fun of people, but I think they're funny. Additionally, to think in terms of future probability assumes an orderly universe. Now, we've talked about that before. Our little example of the pencil, dropping the pen. How do I know it's going to fall? Well, I know because I live in an orderly universe, which is the same yesterday, today, and forever, because the God who created it is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and he has demonstrated countless times that he operates by orderly laws. So I can project past experiences into the future. But if I live in a chance universe, I can't do that. Because chance is, by its nature, unpredictable. Go look it up in the dictionary. That's the dictionary definition. They say, well, but there is no order. Well, if there is no order, and only an appearance of order, to rely on an appearance of order, to proceed in an orderly way, time after time after time, is once again nonsense. So, however, a naturalistic cosmos lacking the creator God of order, who is the same yesterday and forever, cannot account for the uniformity of nature, much less depend upon it, resting as it does squarely on a foundation of chance or randomness, which can only most implausibly be said to be the same from one moment to another, much less being the same yesterday, today, and forever. If any of the above preconditions are absent, then human knowledge becomes impossible. Because the observable facts of the world clearly include human knowledge, or else, once again, this transaction of my writing and your reading could not be occurring, or in this case, my talking and your listening, then chance as an epistemological assumption is an absurd fraud. And chance as an epistemological, easy for me to say, huh? Yeah, right. Assumption is absurd. We are necessarily once again thrown back on the only remaining game in town, the assumption of a super intelligent, super powerful, supernatural creator of the cosmos, the triune creator God of the Bible, as we will show. Okay. We only have time to get started on this next subject, but this is the most, how shall I say this? It's the camel whose nose is in the tent, and he's planning to follow. And it's a terrible problem if it's not dealt with by Christians in a rational way. It will end up destroying our worldview. It's the basis of the naturalistic scientists' ontology. It's the theory of evolution. Okay? It's impossible to overstate the effect upon each of us of the world of ideas, good or bad, in which we have been steeped from birth. If we could imagine asking a fish what he thinks about water, and if he were a rational being and could give a cogent answer, of course he may be more rational than many naturalistic scientists.
Sounds fishy.
You think it sounds fishy? Well, maybe so. We would probably find that he never thinks anything about it. He merely accepts it as the background noise or ambience of his existence, a fundamental fact that for him needs neither contemplation nor explanation. In the same way that a fish lives in water, human beings live in a cultural setting. Without serious contemplation, analysis, and evaluation, all that we think, say, and do will be a reflexive, unthinking mirroring of that cultural setting. Without serious contemplation, analysis, and evaluation of the world around us, we can be but small cultural pieces of the larger cultural milieu, uncritically embodying its flaws and imperfections as well as its positives. Reflecting the culture in which we live is not necessarily a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing, however, if the culture is based on lies and misperceptions. To abstract oneself from one's cultural milieu sufficiently to accurately analyze and evaluate it is very difficult. I can't even begin to tell you how difficult it has been to think my way through writing this book. I wrote countless contradictions that when I read them later I thought, what? And I had to pray about it and think about it and sort through it to where I could finally present it in a way it wasn't contradictory. And I'm a guy who spent his whole life trying to make sense of everything and integrate all the bits of my knowledge. But when you write things down, let me tell you, they come back to
The chickens come home to roost.
yeah, that's right. I mean, they are what they are. And you can pretend they're not, but they are what they are. And if they don't make sense, you got to do something about it or stop trying to write. To abstract oneself from one's cultural media is sufficient to analyze and evaluate it is very difficult. Christians, properly understood, cannot be simply products of the larger culture. Why? Because being so contradicts their new birth in Christ. In John 2:15-17, we're told that we're to be in the world, but not of the world. We cannot be like, if we're just like the world, if we're not different from the world, we're not God's children. And if we're not God's children, he will have no part in us. It's not an option. You don't get to be one of God's children and belong to the world. You're still in the world, but you don't belong to it. If you want to belong to the world, fine, do that. But then on the judgment day, when you go knocking on them pearly gates, don't be surprised at the response you get. For Christians to fail to work diligently at integrating themselves into God's culture, to think his thoughts after him, creates an inner tension that neutralizes their witness and paralyzes their effectiveness in the war between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Remember, that is the overriding cultural milieu within which we find ourselves set by God. We're either in this group or we're in this group, and the two groups are at war with one another, and they will be till the end of time. That's what God tells us. You say, oh, I don't think that's true. Well, fine. Tell that to God. I'm sure he'll listen to what you have to say. Probably he'll rethink his whole plan. Who knows? I mean, you're pretty smart, right? I'm not that smart. I just want to know what he said, and I'm going to believe him. I'm going to believe him because I can't make sense of anything without him as the foundation stone of everything. He has to be the starting point for every thought, or I can't make sense of anything. If you can, go ahead. But I can't, and I'm explaining how to make sense of the world using God as the cornerstone of my reality. Now remember this, we talked about this before. The test of credibility or truthfulness of a person, an idea, a group of ideas, or an entire culture is two-pronged. Remember? First, whether it coheres internally, that is, whether it is free of internal contradictions. Second, whether it is subject to rational proof or is merely arbitrary. Contradiction within a belief system makes untenable the entire system. Arbitrariness, offering bald, unsupported assertions, lacking proof, eventually dissipates into irrelevance or hardens into force. Well, think about it. How many people that you know who contradict themselves regularly do you bother to put any trust in? Let me guess. None. Now, what about arbitrariness? People who say things that cannot be proved. They're just always saying things. And some of them might make a little bit of sense, but you ask them why, and they shrug their shoulders, or they just give you some meaningless gobbledygook. It isn't very long before you don't have any use for what they have to say at all. If contradiction is permitted within a belief system, then upon principle, every truth assertion is fair game for contradiction, not just the original contradiction initially accepted for the sake of convenience. If every truth claim of a belief system can be both true and not true at the same time and in the same sense, the entire system can be ripped apart at every seam. It cannot defend itself. It cannot. Arbitrary claims, arbitrary statements vitiate themselves because they can claim no more authority than can be conjured by the force or influence of the person making the statements. I mean, if somebody points a gun at you and says, cookies are cakes, they're not cookies anymore, they'll be cakes from now on, then you'll be very glad to agree that cookies have now become cakes. But as soon as he removes the gun and leaves, you don't believe him. Because no amount of force can make a thing true that's not true. It can make you say it's true, but it can't make you believe it's true.
So 2 plus 2 is not equal to 5?
Huh?
2 plus 2 is not equal to 5?
Yes. We are free to form our opinions as we wish. We cannot, however, expect them to be freely accepted by others as facts, true facts, if they lack convincing proof. In the end, as noted, arbitrariness is a broad highway leading ultimately either to irrelevance or to the jungle where might, of one form or another, makes right. Now, you may want to live in that world. I don't. Let us not deceive ourselves. The debate over creationism and evolutionism is the Archimedean lever which will determine the direction of human culture forever. All action begins with thought, even actions which appear firmly rooted in raw feeling. We are not instinctual creatures. We are rational, even when rationality manifests itself in a decision to abandon a rational course in favor of feeling. Whether we consciously think about it or not, our view of the origin of the universe, together with our view of our own origin, is foundational to all else we think. And in the end, as we think, so are we. Well, Bill, that's 31 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Sure is. It's still recording over there. Everything went well on the Facebook? As far as you can tell? Good.
As far as I can tell.
All right. No real questions today. I did start reading your book. I had to laugh when I read the part about ontology, epistemology, and hold on, don't tell me. Ontology is cosmology, and it sounds like, I think you put in the book, it sounds like really smart. Not trying to sound smart, but maybe so.
Maybe a little.
Maybe a little.
Well, we still have egos.
Well, nothing real big to share. Everything's still going swimmingly well with COVID-19. We're relaxed. We're not letting ourselves be gripped by fear. Just wanted to say maybe I remember keep my prayers on the family of Ada Martin, my niece Elizabeth, and nephew Jeremy lost their grandmother last Wednesday, and as you know, it's difficult. They won't be able to have a real funeral. They just have to have a graveside service because the funeral home system's kind of shut down, so to speak, in a way.
Yeah.
Well,
even my barber is shut down.
Ah.
I had to chop in my own hair.
Oh no!
Get it out of my eyes. You'll have to forgive me, fellas.
Well, sorry. May God bless y'all, keep y'all, and Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.
God bless you.
All right.